Well, hello, and welcome back to our series called James Real Life, Real Faith. And we started our first podcast discussing what James had to offer us in chapter 1, and now we're moving on to chapter 2. And Jeremiah and I have spent a lot of time talking about this letter from James and how to interpret it and what it means for our everyday life. Jeremiah, what do you think so far? What's your big takeaway from the letter of James?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thanks for having me around, keeping me
Yeah.
around. It's always a fun journey with you. James is interesting. I think it's very different than other New Testament books as this who he's writing to and the scope whom he's writing to and what he's talking about is bigger than most people. It doesn't feel like he's addressing super specific issues. He's addressing more human nature. Like if you break down some of the stuff the core of what we're talking about today is how do you treat people, right? And how do you view people do you view them for what they can do for you, or do you view them as what you can do for them? And it's a very important lesson, right? And he even brings up, was it, he calls it the royal law. We would
Yeah.
call it the golden rule, right?
Yes.
And then also, but he addresses this very core tenet of faith that I love. Of so oftentimes, are you familiar with the term Pascal's wager?
No.
So Pascal's wager was something that happened in the 1600s, and basically, it's this philosophical viewpoint that with what is at risk of all eternity, why wouldn't you believe in God?
Oh, yeah.
Because if let's say that it isn't that God is not true, you don't really lose anything. But if it is
Right.
true, you stand to gain everything. Now, I think that that's an interesting philosophical standpoint, but what that loses is faith without works, right? Because if you just believe in
Right.
God, it's just not a belief in him. And so I think that it's interesting how this chapter specifically addresses things that you and I will deal with every day, right? The royal
Right.
law or the golden rule. And then if we believe in God the way we claim we do, how does that manifest in every detail in our life? And I think it's very practical when you start to wrap your mind around that, but not easy.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great sort of an overview of what we're going to talk about. So let's dig into a little bit more of the details. He begins by talking about this question of prejudice. And, prejudice is a common theme in our lives today, a common theme nationally. And I kind of got to thinking about what have I been prejudiced about? And it's interesting because it's not just people, but it's also prejudice about things that are created or not created. It's prejudice about points of view, for example, somebody's political thinking. It's prejudice about even what they believe. And so I feel like prejudice has been a part of my journey. And now here is James talking about the trouble with being prejudiced. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, prejudice to a point feels like it's baked into our DNA. We intrinsically push back against things that are not like us.
Yes.
And for a lot of history, that probably was beneficial, right? If you lived in a tribe in Europe in 900, foreigners could bring disease, they could bring a different way of thinking, they could be dangerous, so you're going to have your guard up. Now in our modern world, those old tools serve us really poorly.
Yes.
And how do we, and also I think it's hard because the prejudice conversation has morphed and changed from probably its origin to something else. And we're not talking about that. We're talking about if you encounter something, do you truly not like it? And I also love what you talked about, other viewpoints, right? We can stand against other viewpoints because we feel ours is right. But the risk with that is I don't think any viewpoint is 100% right.
Right.
And so we
I
can
don't either.
stand to gain from other viewpoints. And if we're prejudiced, we're
Right.
just hurting ourselves.
I think what happens with prejudice with me is that we have a tendency to put people in a certain box, and we look for what they like, what they enjoy, what they stand for, what they believe, their politics. We kind of combine that all together, and then we put them in a box. And from that box comes our relationship with them. I mean, from putting them in that box sort of categorizes what our relationship will be with that person. If they're closely aligned and we don't feel much prejudice, then we're going to probably be better friends than if there is differences, significant differences, and we don't want to be exposed to that.
Absolutely. Do you have any stories in your life of where you may have treated somebody, put them in a box, and then something happened where they came out of that box and they became a friend or taught you something very important?
Well, I do have one particular friend. Her name is Eileen, and she's been a friend of mine for a long time. But when I first met her, I really didn't like her personality. Now I love it. She's Jewish, and I wasn't so sure about that. She's super liberal. Everything about us are different. She's short. I'm tall. Uh, she was a stay-at-home mom. I was a worker, and so there was this feeling like, well, we're never going to find alignment. But the truth is, we have such a great time together, and we love each other, and we care about each other, and dropping the prejudice and just focusing on the person is what really helped us to come together as just really great friends. How about you? Is there something in your mind about prejudice?
Absolutely. I mean, there's some, quite a lot of my good friends, honestly, when I first encountered them, I put them in a box that I did not like. And then I think, and honestly, what allowed me to move forward out of that was like the golden rule was, how would God want me to see these people? And I realized, oh my gosh, there's a lot in store for me, whether it's a friendship or a business
Yeah.
relationship. I mean, I've even had clients that I thought were going to be amazing clients, and they turned out to be horrible, right? Just not a good fit, let's say. I'm not saying they're horrible people, but just not a great working relationship. And I've had clients that are like, I guess I'll do this. This will be okay. And it's blossomed into long, very fruitful, mutually beneficial relationships. So almost across the board, when I've broken down my biases, I've benefited greatly.
Yeah. It's what happens when you're prejudiced with people is you just cut a lot of people out of your life. And if God is all about relationships and how we relate to each other, this seems like a bad habit we have to kick. So this is why James is talking about it. And his example is the treatment of rich and poor people. Uh, Also, something I think is very current in our life, particularly like how do we honor or how do we focus on people of wealth in our current culture and admire them to such a degree. Maybe they're wealthy, maybe they have power, maybe they're a celebrity. And so we tend to honor, if not actually worship them, and feeling as though because they are these things, rich, powerful, and are wealthy, they're due our honor.
Yeah, do our honor also, I think it's, hey, if they like me, they can, maybe I'll get some of that opportunity. Maybe I'll get some of that wealth.
Yeah. Oh. So you think it's opportunity?
I think that there's many ways that can break down.
Yeah.
You might think these people are more worthy, right? If you look at a class system that exists in society, like, oh, somebody's royalty, they are better than me, and I'm going to treat them as such. Or it's opportunity. And also, I do think that rich people sometimes are just more fun, right? They have means to do things. So you may be like, oh, I can go to a sporting event with this person. So I think that there's many reasons as to why.
Yeah. Well, we kind of look at our relationships with people on a continuum of from poor to very rich. And we often compare ourselves. Where are we compared to somebody else when it comes to wealth, when it comes to means, which I also think is a really bad habit because there'll always be people richer than you, there'll always be people poorer than you. And what James is saying here is that, well, we just tend to like the rich more than we like the poor. And that makes us a judge. We're judging those people. We're judging the poor for being poor, and not having empathy and love and care for them as Jesus did. And we're honoring the rich more, more because perhaps it is opportunity or a chance to get something. And I just feel like I can see James's point of pointing it out to us, like, you should stop doing that. You should just stop it.
So I like the idea, Sandy, of we know we have this problem, and how do we get past this problem? You just brought up the idea of let's make sure we're viewing everybody as God's creatures and equals, and that seems great. It also seems a bit big picture. Do you have any practical thoughts with that? Like, how would you go meet somebody you don't like? How do you remind yourself in the moment of that?
I don't know. No, the truth. I think about, the person in total. Like, I try to put myself in their shoes, listen to them more, which is something that James told us in chapter 1. Listen to their stories, because a lot of time when somebody's talking to you, you can glean information that helps you understand their life position based on their life history. So, we want to puff ourselves up and think, well, we're better than people who are poor. Like, we have been given more, and we think that we deserve it. But the truth is, that is not true. Somebody who is in difficult circumstances, it may not have anything to do with that we're better than them or they're different than us. It may have to do with what has happened in their life. So I don't know. I guess that's the way I approach it, is try to get to know them and see what has happened in their lives, and have empathy for that, as I hope they would for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think another ingredient there is always try to practice humility, right? I mean,
Right.
we should be confident in who God made us and how we are, but also we don't ever have the whole story figured out. And if you I know when I've walked into relationships with humility, I get they're better relationships. And if I walk into them I've got this figured out.
Well, James tells us that God loves the poor, that they are his chosen, that they are rich in faith, heirs to the kingdom. He really prefers the humble, because it is the humble person who truly loves Jesus. Whereas the rich people, they often oppress people. They have a haughty attitude. They treat poor people as inferior, as we just talked about. And this is not true of all rich people, just the bad ones. But
For
this
sure.
division, this polar, what do we call it now, where it's this two-class system, is causing so much strife in our nation today. It's just so sad to see.
Absolutely. Um, I've always found it interesting. I wonder if you have any insight on this, as to the New Testament always talks very generously about poor people. They're going to inherit the kingdom of heaven. Have better faith. It's just always a very generous view of poor individuals. Why do you think that categorically it references? Because I don't think there's any other grouping of people that categorically it references in such great light. Why do you think? What is it about being poor that Scripture is so beneficial to you? If that question makes sense.
I think it's because of their humility. A person in a poorer circumstance is more dependent on God. They're seeking their relationship with God. They're praying to God. They're relying on God. They have a closer relationship, whereas somebody who's wealthy does not. They may not think they need God. They may feel like they're going to have a comfortable life. They've accumulated what they need. They're in charge. They're in control. So it could be a matter of their mentality about who's actually in control of their life.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I mean, if you, I know some of my deepest conversations with God has been at times of need, not necessarily fiscally, for sure fiscally, but other times when I've really felt those are the dark nights, the long dark nights that he reminds you of who he is, and that you've got to give him control over these situations.
If you put aside money and thought about all the other reasons that we go to God, we have
Mm-hmm.
a problem relationally, or we have a problem with our health, or we have a spiritual problem. Well, that both the rich and the poor go to God for that. And that
Mm-hmm.
way we're very much aligned. The only thing that is an outward appearing difference is wealth and money. And in our country, we just value money so much higher than God would like us to. It drives so much of what we do every day that we don't really actually leave enough time pursuing wealth and capitalism to spend more time with Christ.
I like it.
Yeah. So this then leads into this discussion about the royal law, which is, love your neighbor as yourself. It's kind of a triangle of sorts where we love God. He's the apex of the triangle. And then we equally love ourselves and our neighbor. So this would form a very strong bond of relationships if we stuck to this triangle. It doesn't work when we put the person that's your neighbor way down here and we love ourselves way more than the people around us. And again, we kind of live in a culture where we're focused on me, like I love me and I need to take care of me and I need to pursue the things I want. And we're less focused on, well, what does my neighbor need?
Absolutely. I mean, there's the worst version of people is the people that you can tell are only in it for themselves. And with that, you can't value people around you if you're only in it for yourself, because you're putting your needs above those. And it definitely appears that person cannot be strong in faith if you think that way.
Yeah, I mean, when we talk about who is your neighbor, Jesus points that out, that
Mm-hmm.
everybody is your neighbor. So that's a big category, but in our lives, we only encounter so many people throughout our lives. I mean, we're all on the planet together, this group of people, and we live in a certain city and we live in a certain neighborhood, and we have family and we have friends. So it's easy enough to look around who is in your life and say, you are my neighbors. So how am I going to help you? And I mean, what does help look like with a neighbor? What could it look like?
So I think it might, go to a very literal example, and I know it's much bigger than this, as you just reminded us of. But I think of my literal neighbors. It's the people that you're in community with, that you go outside and you can talk to, that you can, if you have a need, if a tree branch fell down or something just practical that they could help you with. But somebody that is concerned about your day and your well-being, and also concerned about your community to keep it safe, to keep it fun and engaging, and they'll invite you to parties, you'll invite them over, those things. So I think that a neighbor is, my answer probably isn't as scriptural as biblical, but just the literal thing of just, man, it's people you care about and care about you.
Exactly. And caring for somebody, we can do that in so many ways. We can reach out with a call, we could reach out with a text, we could bring them a meal. If they're experiencing some health issues, we can drop off some flowers. If there's something celebratory in their life, we can get together as community. We can offer them something that we have that they might need. There's so many ways we can do it. And I just think about what keeps us from doing more of that. What keeps us? Because we hear stories from people, oh yeah, my brother died, or my mother's sick. And what is our typical response to that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the question is, what keeps us from doing more of that? So I think
Right.
that first off, to just clear the air, I think it's important to remember that all of us have different giftings in the kingdom. And certain
Yes.
people are way more empathetic, and certain people are way more likely to even consider getting flowers for a neighbor that went through a hardship. In certain, but one thing I find interesting is the neighbors that will think empathetically are also the neighbors that are less likely to support you if you need to change a flat tire, right? Like, so I think what makes the good neighbor, what stops us from doing this, I think is the simple as what James's point is to hold these other people as the same as yourself, and then use your natural gifting, and also don't try to be something you're not. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't go out of your way to bring somebody flowers when that's not your natural posture, but also don't think you have plenty to offer. I think I know as somebody that is, I don't even consider gift baskets and cards and flowers. Like, I'm not that guy. I'm sure which shocks you, right?
Yes.
But I'm the guy that will ask you a lot of questions. I'm
Yeah.
again, which I'm sure will shock you. I'm the guy that really
Also
wants to know
very
who you are.
surprising.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I want to know who you are. I want to know about your day. I want to know about your vocation. I want to know about your kids. I
So
want to know
you're
how
saying that your gifting is engagement.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But when you
Now
hear
when
that
I'm
somebody has something difficult going on, is that when you engage? Do you go out of your way to engage with somebody?
No, I mean, because I've tried to learn better as that. I've tried to be better at that as I've gotten older. But my natural posture is, I know when I'm overwhelmed, I like to withdraw. I don't like to interact with people.
Yeah.
And so if I find out something's rough with somebody, I typically will give them space because I know that's what
Yeah.
I would like. Now, I'm probably the outlier in society. Most people would like, if people know that they're in a rough situation, for somebody to reach out or do something kind for them. So I've tried to
Yeah.
update the way I behave, because I do think that there is this other. There's the basic golden rule of the royal law of treat others how
Right.
you would want to be treated.
Yeah.
And I think if you add even a more sophisticated nuance to that, is love others the way they want to be loved, and the healthy version of
Yes.
themselves, right? So we can go back to the basic love language stuff. Quality time is huge for me. I know certain people, again, I'm sure quality time would surprise you. I know certain people, quality time's not in their thing at all, and that's not a value of a relationship. So if I'm trying to love somebody by giving them a lot of quality time, it's not going to work. So I think that's where we even have to, follow Christ's teaching of put others above yourself. This isn't about me and what I want. How do I give them what they need in the moment?
Well, what if you're trying to match, love others as you love yourself? So you like quality time, you like conversation, you like food. You're a foodie. You like to cook, and
You combine all
give
those
that
things.
to your you combine all that, and you say you have a friend who suffered, I don't know, a job loss or something that happened, and your natural inclination might be, well, I'll reach out in a little bit when he's had the opportunity to sort it out. But Jesus might say, reach out to him right now and just say, I'm so sorry, or whatever it is that you want to say. I'll bring you food. Let's go have food. And then they can respond as to whether they're open to that. But you have loved him in a way that you might want to be loved. If you had something happen, let's say, and I didn't reach out. I was like, well, I'm just going to leave Jeremiah alone and let him figure it out. How would that make you feel?
For sure. I mean, there's certain moments that make me feel great, but I agree with your point of people want to know they're important. When people want to know they're not alone, right? And how can we help people around us not feel alone and know that they are important? Not the most important. I'm not the most important, but I'm important to you, right?
Right.
And then it also goes back to the humility of just making sure that you remind yourself that your standard view of the world, your standard operating model may not be the best one. And you need to augment that to care for people, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And also, there's so much stuff, so many things that we could unpack with this. And, I don't want to go too far away from the story we're talking about to philosophy. But even things of like, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, right? If you're trying to be the friendly, happy neighbor in this world, but that's because you want everybody to love you for it, we got some problems. So all of this is intention, right? Consider people equal to you. Jesus would probably even say, consider them better than yourselves, not to destroy yourself, right? But it's just a good operating model. And how do you love and care for people beyond what you just think, but what will actually speak to them?
Right. And you can use yourself as the model. What makes me feel good when I'm
Mm-hmm.
going through a trial, which James has just spent a lot of time talking about how we're going to go through them. We all go through them. So, how, as a
Mm-hmm.
community, he's saying, look, as a community, you need to get better at taking care of each other. That's what he's saying. You're not good at it. You need to work on it. So, and he kind of transitions into, with the royal law, how are we then to live? What does that mean in a general sense? And he says to forgive more and judge less.
Hmm.
Forgive people more often. Forgive ourselves. Forgive people for the way they act, which can sometimes be cruel and unkind,
Mm-hmm.
and judge them less. I'm sure we all have a zillion examples of how we hold on to judgment, and it's just so toxic to us, right?
Absolutely. So I have a question for you. I feel like most people are easy to operate one way or the other. Like, I know I actually find it pretty easy to forgive people. I find it impossible to forgive myself. What mode do you operate? What's easier for you to operate in?
I think it's difficult to forgive myself, but I ask for God's forgiveness for what I've done. And I find that by doing that over time, He releases me from that feeling that I should feel bad or guilty for what happened.
So you are
Because we all
similar to me that
sin.
so you're
Yeah.
similar to me that you find it easier to forgive others than yourself.
Oh, I think I have a hard time forgiving others too.
Okay.
I'm the youngest
You're
of
just
six
messed up all
kids.
around.
I'm the youngest of six. I got, treated poorly by my older brothers and sisters in a way, as you do when you're in a big family. And so I was always mad at them and judging them for how they behaved. I probably brought that into my adulthood, felt like I needed to have that righteousness, like I'm right, I'm judging this person correctly, and look, why can't the whole world see it? But it just was a lot of negative space in my heart, like thinking about other people and judging them as compared to say, well, it's their life, and I should have empathy and think of them in a different way and let that go. I don't know. That's how I learned to do it.
Yeah, I think the idea
I'm not
of
perfect at it by any means. I'm
no,
not
no.
perfect
I think
at it.
I think this opportunity is really good for us and anybody listening to wrestle with this, because I think what can easily happen is we will operate in one way. So like, it's easy for me to forgive others, right? It's easy for me to, not easy, but that's easier for me than for me to forgive myself. So I'm like, oh, I'm good. I've got this lesson figured out. And then that's not true, because these lessons are holistic. And how do you point for your we will only want to identify the things we're good at, and it's harder for us to identify or really live in the space of the things that we're not good at, right? And I think the antidote for antidote for the people that are easy for us to judge is, well, don't judge, because that's how you'll be judged, right? And it's like, okay, I know that I don't want to be judged harshly.
Right.
So
That's
I don't
true.
want to judge others harshly. Now, also, if I'm judging myself super harshly, well, God loves me and God cares for me, and God doesn't want me to live in that space of failure, right? He's got bigger plans and wants to keep calling me forward. So I think that we can get derailed in these moments, and there's simple things to move us and ask questions so we can continue our relationship with God and not be stuck in these things.
Yeah, I think James speaks to it so perfectly and concisely when he says, mercy triumphs over judgment. So we just need to be people who extend mercy, including to ourselves, and make mercy our mode of operating instead of judgment, because we don't know. Only God knows what's in the human heart. So let's let him be the one who judge, and let's just stay out of that business forever. So James kind of paints this portrait of people struggling with this prejudice and struggling with judgment. And he poses this question of, what can save us? What can save us from all of this? And it really comes down to our faith in Jesus Christ. And James asks this question so compelling that can faith apart from works save us? Can faith apart from works? Now, this is not a salvation question. Mm-hmm. It's really, I want to make this clear. He's not saying that in order to belong as in order to, when you believe in Jesus, you are saved through your faith.
We're not moving to a works-based gospel or anything.
No, we're not. But we are. James is saying, look, if you've already been saved, what are you doing about it? That's what he's really asking. How is it forming your personality and your day-to-day interaction? And in here, he's talking about the idea of these two different kinds of faith. One is a barren faith, a static faith, and the other is an active faith in which we're bringing faith into our life, real faith. And I think this is a legitimate question for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, again, so there's the base. You believe, there's only one way through the Father, but through me. You believe in Jesus. You've done the thing. But that's the beginning of the story, right? Where we get ourselves confused. That's not the end. And then how do you want to, your will be done? Your will be done here on earth as it is in heaven. I think this starts to unlock that, right? It's going to make the whole system, our whole lives, more godly, more as he designed us to be, if we start to attach works to our faith, right. Deeds to our faith. Not because they earn our faith, but it's just, this is how you live a better life. This is how you live a godly life. And also, I think it's important to hold probably a little bit wider definition than we traditionally talk about. What are these deeds? As I heard it mentioned to me yesterday in a meeting, deeds are just not simply going to a soup kitchen, right? Deeds are not, I'm not saying that they are that, but sometimes it's, how are you taking care of your neighbors? How are you mentoring people? How are you seeking out godly counsels? How are you teaching people? How are you cutting the lady's grass down the street? I mean, it is a big bucket of what faith will motivate you to do.
Right. Oh, no, I love that. I love how all of those things are in action. But I also like your comment about it unlocks an entirely new structure of how to live. So it's like you're entering into the kingdom of God on earth, and now what is your role in this kingdom that Jesus brought down from heaven? And he gives this example of how if you're a Christian and you see a poor person and you simply go by him and you say, well, bless you, God bless you, but you don't do anything, then the question is that just a static faith or is it an active faith? Now, of course, we could talk about the poor and how to manage them, but really the bigger picture is if all we do is say we're believers, but we don't do anything that Jesus called us to do, that is a barren faith. It's an intellectual faith. It's not a fully engaged faith.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it also ensures from, as humans, most of the things that we try to engage in are for our benefit, right? So on the surface, faith, we believe connects us closer to God. That is our benefit, right? Now, but also it's costly, right? And that costly is, what are you doing for others? And if you decouple that, it's clearly a bad picture, and it's not going to make you Christ-like, right? Because you have to have both those things. Connection to your Father is going to help you be sacrificial in certain contexts, whether it's with your time or resources. It may make you make different decisions of where you live, how you live. It's when you start to go down the rabbit hole, it's pretty deep of how far it leads you.
Yeah, my favorite pastor, Dr. Jim Dixon, he used to always say, it's three things: time, talent, treasure. What are you doing with those three things? And, unfortunately, you just have a pretty big number of Christians who have this type of intellectual faith where they have decided that the story about Jesus is true and they accept the content of his message, but they really don't want to surrender their lives. Like they don't want to have to think about how do you use those three things for the kingdom of God. And then you have the people who are more active in their faith, who know that it's the truth, as the intellectual person does, but they do this yielding, they do this relinquishing, they surrender to Jesus, and they get on a completely different path. It's almost like they both start in the same space, but one is progressing forward and the other is, just back here at church on Sundays, kind of thing. It's just not enough to know things about Jesus. We have to also actively have Christ in our life and give him control.
Have you had a moment in your life of growth where you feel like you've done this well? I'm not saying you've done your whole life well, right? But have you done this well? And it's not like, oh, I donated money to a cause in Africa. Do you have any examples of where you feel like you might have done something a little uncomfortable and you're like, wow, that was actually what I supposed it was? It's not like it was easy, but it was what I was supposed to be doing.
I think, well, let me give some examples of that, like closing my business and going back to seminary. And really, in my 50s, which is never easy to be an older learner, that was uncomfortable. Specifically learning Hebrew, I'm just going to throw that out there. Very hard to do. But I just felt like this was a calling. Working on my project that I'm working on now, it was a calling to be faithful to God's ideas for my life, for his will for my life. But relinquishing my life to him has been a constant discussion. And trusting him. This is a long journey of recognizing when you surrender your life to him, he will take care of everything. But you have to do it with absolute belief. You can't say, well, I'm going to give you this little piece of my life over here. And why don't you just take care of that? I'm just going to go ahead and take care of the rest of it. He has a holistic idea and your life is much better. But it does take practice. It's not like you could just flip a switch. I don't think. How about for you?
Yeah, mine might be a little out of the box, but cliche at the same time. I know I really struggled with the idea of having kids. It just sounded like it was a lot of work. I have to give up everything I want. But felt like I was really supposed to have kids. And it's been amazing, right? Now, it is a lot of work. And I do a lot less of what I want to be doing. And it is exhausting. But considering those humans better than myself, considering their needs above my needs, I think it's connected me much deeper to God and a better way of being, a more fulfilling way of being, a more right way of being than, oh, I can't go to a movie late on a Friday night anymore, right? Like those things were just not all that valuable to begin with.
Nobody goes to movies on a Friday night anymore, Jeremiah. Just so you're not missing that much.
It's 2024 and we all binge watch Netflix.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is a mentality. It does require a conversation with God constantly, but it also requires you being willing to step off the dime and just say, I'm going to do it. It's not just, oh, I'm going to give money or I'm going to go work in the soup kitchen. It is that, of course, but it's why you're doing it. It's, I want to be active in my faith. I want to show the Lord that I care about being active in supporting the kingdom of God. So that's what I'm going to do, for sure. Interesting that James then goes into this discussion about how even Satan has faith, static faith. He knows that Christianity is true. He knows who Jesus is. He knows what he did for us. He knows Jesus rose from the dead. He knows Jesus is in heaven with his Father. And yet, all of that is just intellectual knowledge, zero application. He has an understanding, an intellectual understanding about Jesus, but he's not at all interested in going beyond that. And why isn't he interested in going beyond that?
Well, he wants his control and what's in it for him, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He doesn't want to give up control because he thinks he has power and he wants to use that against God. And therefore, he's putting himself, as he did from the beginning, above God. I mean, not from the very beginning, but when he fell from grace, he put himself above God and he fell from heaven. So, yeah.
Yeah, that is maybe the most pointed, barbed part of the story that is very uncomfortable to think about, and you read it and you get it and you kind of want to move on. You're like, I don't want to identify with that. I understand what it's saying, it's real, but I definitely don't want to be that equivalent, right? Or that worthless in my faith. Now, the another part of the story that really stood out to me is the Rahab piece.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Tell me about
Walk us
that.
through that. Well, you walk us through that. What happened?
Well, me. So, gosh, you're testing my memory now. If I remember right, that she allowed some spies to kill a king.
She allowed the spies to come in to, I think it's Jericho,
Okay.
and to survey what was going on, so that they could go back and tell the leader. I'm not an Old Testament scholar, but the point is, she acted in faith when she allowed them to come into her house, right? It wasn't just an intellectual thinking. It was, I'm going to help these men. And she had belief in her faith, and she was obedient to her faith, as was Abraham, which is a story I think a lot of people know way more about, because what did God call Abraham to do?
Yeah, I mean, maybe one of the most bizarre stories in the Bible, if not the most bizarre, of God calls Abraham to sacrifice his son. And Abraham follows through, puts his son on the altar, and then I think a voice comes from on high and says, don't do it. My understanding is he has the knife ready to... I can't imagine this, right? It's a hard story when you get it out of the Sunday school context and you really process it as a parent. It's a very hard story to understand, but it is a story of supreme faith and trust.
Right. He was obedient, and he's a model for obedience, because God didn't intend to harm Isaac, but what he was doing is foreshadowing what was going to happen down the road when Jesus was sacrificed. God's son was sacrificed. So what God is highly valuing here is obedience, doing what God wants you to do. And we probably need to spend more time considering that. What does he want us to do? What does he have in mind for our life? And how do we know that? Who are the voices in our head helping us to understand that, to flush it out, to pray about it, to think about it? Because he's not just going to give us like a script, like when you turn 32, do this, right?
Right. It's hard not to approach it, I think, with as somebody in Christian culture, it's hard not to sometimes approach that with cynicism, because you've seen so many people claim God's will or claim you need to be doing this, when really they're doing the same thing of that we've all done, of they're putting what they want and their needs in front of them. Now, I think it's really easy just to disengage, but yeah, there isn't, to your point, there isn't a plan. There isn't an easy understanding of this, but we have to follow this. We have to pursue this, partially just because it is a more fulfilling life. It's not an easier life, but it is a more fulfilling life. And the closer I get to it, and I'm not close to it, but the closer I get to it, the more rooted I feel in this existence.
Yeah, I used to, for decades, I would pray to God that I really wanted peace in my life. And I just valued that so much. But yet there was still constantly conflict around me and relational challenges, and I'm like, how are you answering this prayer? It feels like you would want that as part of as your will for my life. And it has taken a long time to see how he's providing peace. And some of it is just me being obedience to what he wants me to do. Forgiveness, mercy, not engaging in judgment of people. All of those things will lead to more peace in your life. So he's like, yeah, I get it. You've got the formula. Just act on it.
Yeah, and it's not going to be an easy, just you pray it and you get it. It's going to be, this is a lifetime of work. And it's interesting is even Paul, I mean, I might be bending this story a little bit, but even Paul talks about like, why won't you take this thorn out of my flesh? I think we all in our faith have those moments, right? I mean, anybody listening, I mean, think about that. What is the thorn in your flesh at this moment that you wish that God would just take from you? You feel like you would be more godly. You feel like you'd be more obedient. You feel like you'd be in his will more if he just took this situation or this thing or this way of being from you. And then I think we all have these long-term wrestles of that doesn't seem to be happening, or if it does, it's at a glacial pace. And this is, I'm getting very little relief here, but that does seem to be a cornerstone of faith of some process like that.
Right. We have to participate in it. I mean, of course there's miracles where God will perform a miracle for somebody, but it's far more likely that we have to work it out. We're working it out with God. And I love that because working it out with God requires that we need to be in a relationship. And, this is really a lot of what James is talking about are these relationships and how we treat people, the fact that our faith requires work and effort, the fact that we need to learn about our faith and put it into practice. I actually really think that everything he talks about is applicable today, right here, right now, and has been in my life, and I'm sure it's been in your life too. So I'm very much enjoying listening again to James tell us how to do it, how to be a Christian. I think it's hugely valuable.
Well, especially when you look at the lens that we know to be true of what is God's purpose in our life is to draw us closer to him. It's to strengthen our relationship with him. And these are very practical, fundamental things that we can do, that we need to be doing to have that stronger relationship with our Creator that we know ultimately is going to give us more fulfillment. Yeah,
I love it. And, James, in our next podcast, he goes even deeper into this
one's
idea.
Going to be fun for you, right?
I was thinking of you when I read how to control the tongue.
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, we forget about that part.
I'm talking about what we need to do to control our tongue.
No, that's it. I mean, isn't it just like the first sentence is "Don't be a teacher" because it's hard. You'll be judged more strictly.
Yes, but then he kind of broadens that into, hey, by the way, everybody says stuff they probably shouldn't. So we're all guilty of that as well.
No, this is more about you than me, Sandy. I'm pretty confident of that.
Okay, well, then we'll just have to sort that out when we get to it, right?
Yeah.
Jeremiah, thank you, as always, for this lively conversation, and I appreciate your insights into the letter of James, and we'll move on from here.
Yeah. Awesome. It's always a great time. Thank you so much, Sandy. See you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.